All right. Hi.
Hi.
How are you today, Karelia?
Well, I'm not bad. How are you?
I'm good. I'm sitting here on a porch in central Mexico, and I know we're going to be talking about a subject today that very few dare talk about. So I just wanted to do a little introduction about you and I, and
Okay.
then we'll start broaching the subject. I did have a thought that we might want to do this in 2 or 3 parts. Pretty broad, pretty deep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm Christine, and this is Karelia. We both met several years back while we were moderators on the Project Avalon forum. And getting to know each other, we found very timidly at first that we had a common interest. And it's one of those subjects that very few people on the planet will even broach or can even dare to look at. So even Karelia and myself, in the beginning, we were both a little entered with a little trepidation, sort of like, well, what do you think? And what do you think? And found out that we were willing to really get a little deeper into this and broach it. So without further ado, what are we talking about? We're talking about what has become worldwide known as the topic of the Holocaust. That is at the end of World War II and the decimation of the 6 million Jewish people in the concentration camps of Germany. That's only what we're looking at on the screen, but what we're really looking at deeper here is who was Adolf Hitler, what led up to World War I and World War II, and have we been told the truth? So I'm going to just say to our listeners that I'm going to ask only a couple of things going into this. Number one, it's really necessary to observe yourself, your own reactions, and suspend belief in what you've been told. I don't think Karelia pretends that we have the answers, but we have had the courage to look into it deeper and go even into our own gnosis. That means our own understanding, our own recall, and trying to find some of the deeper answers and what is really being covered up here, if indeed anything is being covered up at all. The second piece to this that I've discovered in my own journey of looking at, which started in about 1996 or so, was that you cannot look at a past time in history from the same conceptual point of view or of the matrix of now. In other words, the people that were living during those times had a whole other way of seeing their life. We now are in a lot of political correctness, what one can talk about, one world ideologies, new age philosophies. All of these things are going to cloud our ability to actually understand what the real people were experiencing as a reality during those times. So I've learned that, and even saying that, I know it could even be considered almost impossible. However, you can get closer to it if you do that. So without really saying too much more than that, I'd like just to open up the subject with Karelia here, and let's see where we go with this. You ready?
Yes, I am.
So Karelia, you and I, we started to realize that we were looking at something maybe from different points of view, but both of us felt that the truth wasn't being told. Would you like to just give a little history about yourself, nationality, and how you got into this?
I was born and grew up in Germany, and I remember when I was a child in the early mid-70s, I remember overhearing the older people who occasionally made remarks such as, they would be discussing a news item of, I don't know, some kidnapping or some murders or something awful, and then they would go, oh, in the old days this wouldn't have happened, or they would have brought justice immediately. So eventually I must have gotten curious, because I once asked my grandmother, and she would say that, people talk a lot of bad stuff, how bad Hitler was, how bad the Third Reich was and everything. But from what she remembered, it wasn't quite what the official version was being told. But of course, being a child growing up, I lost interest pretty fast and never sort of dug deeper until much later. And then in, I think it was 1994, I lived in Berlin at the time, and I read a book by Jan van Helsing, which was entitled Secret Societies of the 20th Century. it went into the whole, not only about the world being run or controlled or governed by some secret force, but also how many lies have been spread, how much secrecy there is, and how there are some subjects that are completely taboo. Now, the difference between early or mid-70s and the 1990s was that in the 70s, nobody had ever heard of the term Holocaust.
Really?
Yes.
Really. I was going to ask you, maybe you could just speak a little bit of what the general society culture of Germany was at that time surrounding those issues.
From what I remember, the older people, if they were amongst each other, they would reminisce about the old days, despite the war, despite all the problems that came with being in a war. They seemed to long for some kind of order that they were missing by the 1970s.
Mm-hmm. Did they feel shame about being German?
Not the older people, no. That was pretty much drummed into us at school in my early teens.
Right. I think that's an important point. Just want to underline it a little bit because I'm also German ancestry, even though I didn't grow up in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being ashamed of that as
Yeah.
a young person. I didn't question it. It was almost something I wanted to hide.
See, I did question it, and I really did. I really got into trouble with at home. I was quite young, and I said, "Well, why should I be responsible for something I never did?" And I was given this whole lecture about, how just because I'm German, I am guilty. I was quiet after that because I felt it was not something that I could resolve with my mother at the time. But I never agreed with that stance. I mean, if my great-grandfather or whoever committed a murder, why would I be guilty for it?
Right. There's an illogical gap there, right? A gap.
Totally.
So, however, you said then during your education as a young person in your teenage years that in your school system you were being taught or it was drummed in. Was this through history classes or was it just a more general overall feeling?
History, religion, German, those three mainly.
Right. Politics, television. Was there a campaign that you could identify?
I don't remember any campaign as such, but I do vaguely remember that, that they were quite. It was the years, when everyone was crazy about everything coming from America. Mm-hmm. So there was definitely a perhaps not so subtle programming going on through the media already.
Right. Yeah, I would just bring it up to the attention of our listeners that it's a good thing to look in yourself and examine, depending on where you fall, whether you are German or you're some other European race or you're Jewish even, because, there are certain attitudes we somehow seem to have adopted and we don't quite really know where they came from.
Yes.
So I would just put them in the more general category of morphic field. But I do remember being very, very ashamed. I have no idea why I felt that way.
Yes, that feeling ashamed with no idea why. I'm familiar with that.
Okay, so then you're moving forward, and you started to look at this. You read this book about secret societies and a force. You said that is controlling the world and what's being occulted. So we can go from there and what you started to examine. Right. Research.
The book also went quite in detail about a subject that I vaguely remember being mentioned throughout the years from my grandmother and her friends, but had never actually come across anything in literature or media or anything. And that was flying saucers, basically.
Oh, really? Okay.
I remember as a child hearing conversation that, there was some, the Wunderwaffen, miracle weapons of Hitler, but nobody knew anything about it. And the author, Van Helsing, actually went into it in more details and dug up a lot of information that isn't generally available to the public. I mean, in the meantime, I've learned that pretty much everything regarding the so-called miracle weapons, which are mainly, well, not so much weapons, but technology that is about, at the time, it was even an American once admitted that the Germans' technology in the 1940s was about at least between 100 and 1,000 years ahead of the rest of the world.
Right. So just for, again, in Van Helsing's book, when you said he found things to indicate this, were these documents, letters, newspaper clippings? I mean, I myself have seen
all of it.
Right. So
he proved with newspaper recordings, for example, or snippets that the world or the powers that be at the time wanted Germany to go down. That they wanted to eliminate Germany and the Germans off the world, you know, the maps of the world, basically. And there were a few newspaper snippets about Foo Fighters and other unidentified flying objects that were, the newspaper articles made out that they could only come from Germany.
Okay.
And then he also published drawings of various saucers. Mm-hmm. Spaceship.
So in the book, he's speaking about secret societies also, right? And
oh, yeah.
Obviously, finding things about alien, we could call it alien or off-world technologies, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Things certainly weren't known about in the 40s. Did he mention specific secret societies and who was behind them?
Well, he mentions various branches of the Freemasons. Mm-hmm. The book is available free online. It was forbidden in Germany about 3 or 4 years after it came out.
Right. Okay. So,
which is another interesting fact.
Exactly. We'll get into that a little deeper in a bit about when governments and lawmakers or controllers, whatever you want to call them, start forbidding free translation of information. Why is that? That's a big question. And I just want to stay with what pricked your interest and how you what you started to investigate yourself. Being
right.
You had access to things in Germany that even in German language that many English speakers don't have access to. Is that correct?
Yes, I found, especially since, the late 1990s when the internet became widely available, I found that most of the stuff that is available, and that is very little in itself, but most of that is only available in German.
Yeah, I mean, it's for an English speaker, I know it's frustrating because occasionally you'll send things along and, it's the best we can do is try to, make a little synopsis of what you're reading.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, it's becoming wider available now because there are, many Germans who take the time and translate bits and pieces of it into English and put it on the internet. But that wasn't the case until, 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay, so let's, looking at being a German in Germany and looking at what you were studying in the 1970s, did he speak about the secret German societies of World War II?
Yes.
He did, okay.
It was the first time I came across the names Thule and Vril.
Vril, exactly, and I would venture to guess, because I speak of this to some pretty enlightened people I know, many haven't even heard of the Vril Society or the Thule Society.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So,
according to Wikipedia, it is a myth.
It's a myth, and yet there's books, there's symbols, there's documentation, there's drawings. So why don't we just give a little overview of who the Vril and the society was, and how that came into being, and how close this is tied to the information that Hitler had access to.
I can try, but with no guarantee how much of it is true. It's just stuff I've read from different sources over the years.
Right.
The Vril Society started probably in 1919, just after World War I. It was originally organized by a baron or something, but from day one there were a couple of female mediums involved who allegedly channeled information, and especially technological information, from another world. That's how it allegedly started. So, and out of that was born the Vril, or I think the Thule Society was first, and then out of that came the Vril Society, with the difference that the Vril Society would deal only with the esoteric side, and the Thule Society would deal mostly with the practical or physical 3D side.
Or the applications of what they were receiving.
Basically, yeah.
Right. So the woman, it's Maria Orsic. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Yes, she's one of them.
Okay. So is she a documented person though? I mean, are there birth records? Are there things that prove her existence? Or
not to my knowledge.
Okay. So what we have though are pictures. We have depictions. We have writings. We have drawings. Is there?
We have writings, yes. There are drawings, just of what she allegedly channeled, making notes or drawings, and that's about it. But her name appears often enough, and I think 1 or 2 documents are even signed by her. So I suppose there was somebody in that role.
Yeah. So what the basic what was happening then, and this is happening concurrently to the time of the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany?
That was from the 1920s onwards.
So we're moving through the time of World War I into World War II.
Yes.
All right. And we do know, and this is documented and commonly accepted, that Hitler had a great interest in esoteric and knowledge, that he actually sent.
Absolutely.
Right. So he did send out groups all around the world to go to different sites and different places that were from Tibet to wherever, looking for.
He did once he was in power, yes, but there were people before he came to power who privately financed expeditions.
Right. So
very small groups. But they did exist.
In a certain way, just even as we're speaking about it, I mean, we can also see that world leaders of today have also been noted that they also have interest in lost information, highly evolved technology, and then we get into the whole field of extraterrestrial technologies. After you spend some time reading this material, and I also know that you have, through the internet, have access to different court records, different, let's say, what happened to Germany after the war.
Most of that is still classified.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Right. So just in your own words, Karelia, just to give it, sort of an assessment of what your years of researching and studying this have brought you to conclude, or at least have a solid hypothesis about.
Well, basically, my conclusion is that, yes, there was this secret society. Whether it was 1 or 2 is really irrelevant. There was a secret society that dealt with esoteric matters, I suppose Robert Morningsky would say that dealt with the 96%.
The unseen.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
What strikes me is that apparently the Vril Society was entirely run by females.
Right. The image they give of these females are women that would sit, or they would channel information, some of it highly technological. One of the striking things about them was that they never cut their hair. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So there was a belief, and this is a common belief even amongst most indigenous people, that the hair is actually a sort of type of antenna and like field. So that was the reason they did that. They were bringing in information from a star system. Is that correct, or was it a planet?
I think it's the star system, Aldebaran.
Aldebaran. Right.
Which is said to be trailing the Pleiades.
So, and the basic message was, what was the basic reason, or that they were here on the planet Earth, and what were they wishing to accomplish?
Apparently they were not on Earth.
Okay.
They had been to Earth long ago, and they had made mistakes, and they found it was time to rectify those mistakes. Now that is one, I can only say theory, because we don't know for certain. But what they did is give or pass on information how to build flying machines capable of going into space.
So they were working with anti-gravity technologies,
Yeah, exactly.
things that were not known at all during the 1940s, things that we're having an understanding of just now, actually.
Yeah, although there were some Germans who at the time were perfectly aware, like I think it was Victor Schauberger,
Mhm.
who was a complete genius, and he said that anything that is based on explosion is basically for destruction and therefore satanic, and anything that is based on implosion is not destructive and therefore creative and therefore divine.
Wow. That's a
And
good,
I mean, if you look at the world today, that statement makes perfect sense.
right. Yeah, and I guess we're also talking about, the beginning of the supposed technological revolution when we got a light bulb.
Yeah.
Right,
Yes.
with Edison and all of that, but we already had Nikola Tesla and all of that about free energy.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a deep understanding, even at the turn of the century there, going into the century, that there were these forces or these unseen forces that could be harnessed for the good of humankind.
Yes.
So
It also makes sense then why the powers that be have kept all information about the society under lock
right, so it's not just
until today, because if you have a group of people one of whose members eventually comes to power of a whole country, a whole nation, if it's known that this society was going by the philosophy to not destroy but to create, i.e. it's the satanic versus divine duality there, and they were in favor of the divine, then you can't accuse a leader of that nation to kill however many millions of people, because then somebody would turn around and say, hey, that doesn't make sense. If he knew that any form of destruction is anti-divine, then he wouldn't do it.
right,
Because it's not just knowing, like you read it in a book, you know it deep inside. You know it's not right to do that, so you don't do it.
exactly. I mean, becomes and this brings a huge schism to the way we've been taught to view our history.
Exactly.
Because we are taught, first of all, I mean, in every country, in every history book, we are taught that Adolf Hitler was the most evil being that ever walked on the face of the earth. Any really even cursory glance of history, whether it be Chinese history, Indian history, the white American, Spanish history coming over to also we have to see that genocide and these holocausts have been practiced on our planet throughout time.
Exactly.
Why, when this is my mind talking or me, having to go through my own process, then why was it so deeply embedded in our psyche that this one man was so evil?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so something started to not add up.
Exactly.
And the couple things that I also note, I'll just make note of my own thought process on this. When I was first introduced to the idea that Hitler was not the most evil satanic person on the planet, I literally got sick to my stomach. And that really provoked in me a certain sense of like, what's happening here? I mean, it's not like a thought I formed myself. It's not like I went into history and I read about what he had done and I looked at pictures of the Holocaust and I even had studied World War II. I hadn't read anything.
Right.
So I started to say, why do I feel this way?
Mm-hmm.
What evidence do I have as a free thinking being, right? And it's almost like a whisper innuendos that went through all of our psyches that we just accepted it.
Absolutely.
That's why I say to anybody listening, the first thing you have to do is just have at least enough to stay open. I don't think either you or I are trying to convince anybody of anything. I have found
it's important to know how deep the programming runs with that particular subject.
Exactly. And so it requires that, or we can't get through it. And I think you and I both have, discussed this in private often enough to understand how many obstacles are in the way to the human psyche, even opening up to the possibility.
Yes.
So we're looking at a big schism if on one hand, we could take it the most evil genius on the planet, right? That it just had it out for the Jewish people and wanted to wipe them off the earth.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have to question, well, okay, just the Jewish people? I mean, wouldn't the most evil genius on the planet want all the power of all the world, right? And we also,
Yeah.
then I would go, to the question and ask you, because I know you've looked at this probably more than I have. Well, how many times did Hitler try to broker peace with England?
Oh, numerous times.
Yeah, I think there was.
It wasn't just one feeble attempt. I mean, he made allowances. I forgot the details now because it was a while that I read it.
Mm-hmm.
But he made quite a lot of allowances to convince the British to, have peace instead of war.
Mm-hmm.
And they wouldn't hear any of it.
Right. If I remember the numbers correctly, and we can, when we post this interview, we can put up some links. I think it was something.
Right.
I think there's 14 documented attempts at making a peace treaty.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And they were all rejected. So we're looking at something there that doesn't sound like a person that wants to take over the world. Just a few little details of things that we've looked at that start to break apart the monologue about Hitler. He had in his troops, in his army, I believe this is a fact, that he believed in sovereignty of the people and their culture. Believed he had
that is my understanding as well. Yes,
that he even had troops that worshipped the Quran. He had and that he actually honored them for that. And there's pictures, right? So we're not looking at somebody that what I see is kind of a mirror weird thing is was saying he believed in national sovereignty. If I believe that right, cultural sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that what he saw, or what there's a possibility we can all look at, that there was a group of, let's call them people, on the planet that didn't believe in national sovereignty and the right to freedom, that were
absolutely
looking at being the chosen ones and taking over the planet. So this is difficult territory to wade through.
Yes, I mean it's you never see in the history books, for example, that one of the first deeds Hitler did when he came to power was to throw out the private banksters.
Right, and
the bank became, it came under the ownership of the government. The money was created by the government.
And he became very prosperous too. So
exactly, and that alone is it's a big no-no in this world.
Right. Well, what we also have is our recent history of what happened to Gaddafi in Libya. So to be reminded of who's actually committing the genocide on the planet. So I just want to go to that for a while. And I'm not an expert, and I don't pretend to be. But there are things that I've read and studied. And one of the things that commonly gets thrown up in this discussion is, well, Hitler took money from the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds in the beginning. And I don't know if that would be true or not. However, I could understand that after Germany was basically decimated after World War I don't think you could say everything was taken from them. And
absolutely.
So one would say, well, if a leader wanting to raise his country back out of rubble and did so in such a short amount of time, he needed to temporarily take funds from the cabal.
Whoever he could get them from, yes.
Right. So I look at that and I go, well, that would be the only way to do it. We're looking at a very similar scenario on our planet right now, which perhaps is another conversation. So what we have, though, is when you say the banksters, we are speaking of the, who are we speaking of? I mean, I know this is was where we get into words like Zionism and the Zionists. Is that what you're speaking of?
Well, I'm speaking of the small group of people who run the world, and first and foremost the bank.
Right. So we're speaking of those that have accumulated a great amount of wealth and that are actually manipulating the financial systems.
Yes, they own the financial systems throughout the world. I mean, I don't think there are any. North Korea maybe, and I don't know which other country is left to, where the bank is not owned, the central bank is not owned by the Rockefellers or Rothschilds or whatever else their names are.
Right. So there is documented, speeches of Hitler actually throwing out these banksters, right? And
Yeah.
just if we step a little bit sideways, into that world of that we're talking 1930s, 40s. We're looking at a lot of history that does revolve around the Zionist movement. Um, I don't want to even really get into that because I'm not an expert on it, but that was what he was trying to free Germany out from under the debt system.
That is my understanding, yes.
Right. So when he rose to power within Germany, what was the situation as he rose economically, and what did it look like before the war started again?
When he rose to power, the inflation was such that you had to take bags and bags full of paper money to buy a loaf of bread, but most people couldn't even afford to buy that loaf of bread.
Mm-hmm.
That was the situation in Germany. I think within 2 or 3 years of him coming to power, everyone had work. Everyone was enabled to have annual holidays. And if they couldn't afford it because, they didn't get enough paid, they got subsidies from the government to be able to afford an annual holiday.
So, because it's often portrayed through the pictures they show of this adoration of Hitler, it wasn't just that he was a firebrand leader spouting propaganda. The life fundamentally changed.
Oh, yeah, the German people's lives changed dramatically and drastically to the better with him in power. There's absolutely no doubt. I mean, that cannot be denied.
Right. So we would just know human nature, such as if you have a strong leader who's, providing for the people in the country. That person would receive a lot of admiration from those who are under his rule.
Absolutely.
Because it's interesting, and I haven't really ever done this, even when thinking about it. I'm really paralleling a lot of what happened in Libya right now, and what happened in Libya. That's another. I'll keep going back to it because, here's a country that had generated a lot of wealth within itself, distributed it in a really fair way amongst its people, and took care of the people. One would think that that's what a government or a leader would be doing, whatever type of government or whatever type of leader that really cares about its citizens.
Exactly.
Right. Going through that, we will step into the political situation on the world at that time, where I believe that what was used, well, I don't even want to say it because I'm such not a scholar, but so Germany getting involved in World War II, what was happening there that you know of?
Well, there are obviously two versions. The official version is that Germany started the war against Poland.
Okay.
The less official version, and I don't know how much of that is true, whether it is true at all, or whether the official version, whether there's any truth to the official version. The second version says that the Polish people in Poland along the German border kept attacking German border villages. And not just attacking, but like they apparently massacred entire villages.
Okay.
And eventually Hitler had enough of that because he asked the Polish government at the time several times to have their people stop that because he knew it was all sanctioned by the Polish government. But they wouldn't hear any of it, and eventually he decided it was too much because his people, his nation was in, grave danger if they lived near the Polish border. And that's why he marched into Poland.
We might be looking at a broader based scenario of a world war than just how it's portrayed now, was that basically that what Hitler wanted to do was destroy the Jewish people. I mean, that's
the official version.
Right. We don't really. So I'm just going to put it out there that are things out there that that wants to know more can start to investigate it, getting outside the official version. I think we needed a little break there. It is such a vast subject, really, and it is so deeply covered with so many different, in so many different ways, really, from our political system, our school system, our our very science system actually has covered up much that was coming out during that epoch of time of the turn of the century. And since I'm not really, nor do you pretend to be an expert in the politics of the time, even though we've read quite a bit, probably not best to speak on that so much. I know you and I have, our search of the truth, no matter where it leads us, has also requires that we do look into the unseen, the unmanifest world, as you want to call it, and this force. So perhaps a little bit more about the Vril Society, technologies that were being developed, the more important esoteric aspect of this, where one needs to somewhat judge the outcome of history, where we're looking at what's on our planet right now. Are we being divinely guided, or are we blowing each other apart? And, by their works, so shall you know them, sort of aspect of it. And even to say that, one needs also to use a great deal of their own intelligence and discernment. Maybe you could speak a little bit more about the Vril Society, what was understood, why breakaway civilization, even at that time, around that time. We're looking at, again, many people are speaking about a breakaway civilization right now. Is that all connected, or is that something separate from what's happening at this current time?
I know as much as you do, or rather as little, but what I have read, and it does ring true, is that Hitler forbade secret societies after he came to power.
Okay.
The Vril Society went and started a company. I don't remember the name of it, but it dealt mostly with finding companies and engineers who could deal with producing non-conventional craft. And they seem to have had some success. And what I find particularly interesting, if you look at the UFO history worldwide, since 1945, there were lots of sightings. Before that, there are hardly any records of any sightings of UFOs. And then suddenly, after 1945, it explodes. Not just in one or two countries, but literally all over the globe.
Wow.
And I can't help the feeling that this is connected to that secret branch of, Hitler's Germany. There were rumors in Germany that a couple of million people disappeared during the last 2 years or so of the war.
Okay.
Some of which are said to be from Russia or Ukraine or Eastern Europe, and the rest being German. They chose allegedly young people with little or no family left. And then, of course, the whole world now is aware of all the rumors flying around about base 211 in Antarctica, which is allegedly a secret German base. There are supposed to be bases in the Andes, in the Himalayas, and basically everywhere in places that are hard to get to. Now, I would imagine that you can't live, 12,000 foot up on a mountain if you don't have the right transport to get around. So in a way that would make sense if it's true.
What you're saying is that from the time of Hitler, that at the end of the war, a large group of individuals was taken to these different secret bases. And there's speculation that they exist right now. And they're using...
they use the technology that they started developing during the war and even before that.
So these people, in conjunction, I guess, in working with what we could only call off-world intelligences, the purpose of this breakaway civilization is to be prepared for. Are they here to help? Are they here to take over? Or what was the purpose that you've understood?
To my understanding, the purpose was to help free humanity. I'm not sure whether that has ever been true or whether it still is true. I've spoken to a few people who are aware of that subject, and some say that, they lost interest in regaining Germany, for starters, because, Germany is a puppet state of the US. You
Mhm.
can't really put it any other way. And to this day, I mean, the war allegedly ended in 1945, but there's a whole can of worms about whether the war ended or not, because Germany herself actually never surrendered. It was the army that surrendered.
Right. So you're saying the government of Germany, whatever that is, never surrendered.
No.
Right.
And since the Federal Republic has been in place, which started in 1948, everything had to be sanctioned by the US,
So,
which, made sense until the Berlin Wall came down. But after that, Germany was supposed to be a sovereign state, and it isn't. We have no constitution still.
okay.
We have no peace treaty. The UN, the United Nations War Enemy Clause is still in effect. It has never been cancelled. And that's that Germany is an enemy. Now, of course, the question is, which Germany are they talking about? Definitely not the Federal Republic, because, they are part of the system.
So who formed the Federal Republic of Germany?
4 victors: Russia, US, UK, and France.
So they
basically made the rules.
Okay. But did the German people vote on this, or how was this installed as a governing body or a governing concept?
It started off, I think, as a democracy right from day one. So, yeah, people would vote
So
politicians into government.
Right. So there is the belief, or in some convoluted laws that they write way, it is an entity. It's a recognized entity.
Yes.
Okay. But you're saying that that's a violation of what happened at the end of the war, that Germany...
Well, I'm saying that things don't add up.
Right.
Japan lost the war. Japan has a peace treaty.
Right.
Why does Germany not have a peace treaty?
Okay.
Nearly 70 years after the end of the war.
Well, then one would also ask, if we were thinking of a free Germania, or of Germany being a free sovereign country, I believe I'm correct in stating that it's against the law to question the Holocaust or the official version of World War II. Is that what exactly?
Yes, that's pretty much correct.
And that's not just the case in Germany, but in a great deal of...
No, there are quite a few European countries where that is the case. I know that one author who's written several books on the Third Reich, he's a so-called revisionist historian, David Irving. He spent time in jail in Austria for that, for that very reason. And Sindel, he's one of the better known ones, because there's a lot actually available on the internet in English as well. He spent years in a German prison, as did his lawyer who defended him.
Right. So, I mean, we're all savvy enough in the world of false flags and psyops right now to understand that, you don't make a law to prohibit something if there's nothing to cover up.
Exactly.
Right. And in Germany right now, the political heartbeat, or what do most people feel? Is it still like forbidden to even, are you still basically feel psychologically and morally that you should be feeling bad about World War II and making amends and ducking your heads? And
I don't know, because I have not lived in Germany since the 1990s, basically. But in those days, it certainly was the case. But the other issue with Germany now is that there aren't that many Germans left. It's become a very international, multicultural playground.
Right. And we would dub it under, the loose title, it's under the orders of the one world government.
Yes, of course.
Or the banksters, or the banking cabal, the banking elite. Right. So Germany was actually put on her knees in that way.
Yes.
As other countries have been. I'm just worried because...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Germany's by no means the only one.
Right. So, just going back a little bit, one step backwards, and then I would love to continue to have this conversation. I usually find by actually talking about these things, it brings more questions quite often than there are answers.
Yes.
So, I mean, that would be, I could say if underlying anything that we might be publishing right now is to invite people to question. Don't rely on exactly what your history books have told you. If you have a violent reaction of any sort to anything that breaks, that's challenging your particular paradigm, it's a really good marker for anybody to stop and start to investigate.
Absolutely.
And, what we really are looking at in the very world picture right now is that we have a worldview that is put out through the mass media in multinational, way all over the world, different countries, that anybody that questions the official version of what happened with World War II and Hitler is a anti-Semitic. They have to be against Israel just by questioning what happened. And verboten, some places it's illegal to even question it. Now that ought to make any truth seeker stand up and go, wait a minute, something doesn't add up here.
Exactly.
Right?
It's like with, any other subject that is imposed on us and that, we are discouraged to question. I mean, look at the medical system, look at the school system, you name it,
Right. If you question it or don't go along with the status quo, you're going to be painted the enemy, right? So any of us could actually find ourselves knowing that we're peace-loving beings who are looking at our own divinity and looking at our own responsibility can be branded the enemy.
Yeah.
I know that there are propaganda machines out there that are highly tuned to make it look that way.
Absolutely.
So that's really, I think, what we're asking our listeners to consider when we look back in history at what was done with the Third Reich and Adolf Hitler and all of that. The other wisdom piece that any wiser human might say right now is that none of us are perfect. We are all in this together. So it doesn't mean that every choice that was made in the Third Reich was a perfect choice, but it also does not mean that what was happening there is as they painted it in our history books.
Exactly.
And there's plenty of information coming forward right now to disprove that. I also want to just note something to you, Karelia, because we haven't talked about it. I look for common language markers. That means common responses that are almost verbatim as a manner of thinking that these might be mind implants.
Yes.
And I've noticed that with working with people that actually have been through different mind control programs in this life, or they recall past ones, that they tend to repeat the same thing exactly each time you ask the question.
Yes, like speaking with somebody who is, pro-vaccination, you get the same identical answers to every question you ask.
Right, and across a wide population, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
Anybody under that, yeah. So this is something that I've noticed, and I'm some of my very best friends are people that were brought up in the Jewish religion, right? And so it has nothing to do with Judaism. I mean, this is not
no, absolutely.
But it's one of the more heavily culturated people on the planet.
Yes.
There's an identity there. And it's hounded into them from the time they were born. I grew up in a somewhat loose suburb, mishmash, what do you call it, pot of, society in America. So I didn't have a strong identity that way. But in general, people that are brought up in a Jewish family are given a very strong identity marker.
Absolutely.
And so when I say to any of my friends, I'm questioning the Holocaust, I don't believe it happened the way they said it happened because I'm seeing evidence. They all have the same response. But we know somebody in my family who was was there. And it is so verbatim the way they say it. It's like an automatic response. And I don't say that bad things didn't happen. Wherever there's war and destruction, horrific things happen. People lose their humanity during war.
Yes, they do.
Right? But that's very different from being open to saying maybe it didn't happen the way our history books have painted the story.
Exactly.
Right? So I'm just inviting people once again to open up a little bit, open up some different possibilities, actually look at some of the evidence that's out there. And it's not so much of rectifying something that happened in the past, but it's about gaining our own knowledge for what we're up against right now in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, how can we live in truth if we don't know the truth?
Right. Yeah. Or even be willing to know the truth. You see, I mean, that's even, that's step that precedes knowing the truth.
Yes, I understand that's a problem for some.
Yeah. Well, it is for many.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've had your own, made your own stand on the vaccination issue. And I know
Yeah.
you've been attacked for that. Then you say, well, there is obviously not even a willingness to look. We can probably end our talk today here.
Mm-hmm.
Just leaving that space open. Don't be afraid to question. That is the one thing they've got going on us, because once we question and then once we start to understand the truth, it actually returns to us our responsibility for
Yes.
our own actions. And at the same time, when we accept that responsibility, then we start to find true freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So I would invite anyone, even if the subject makes you angry or upset, or you think we're a couple crazy ladies talking together, whatever, don't let that stop you from doing your own investigation.
Absolutely.
Right? And we started out saying this was a vast and deep subject matter. I'd like to continue having a few more talks if you're willing, Karelia.
Yes, I would love to. There's so much that, the subject also branches out. There are, I think I mentioned these prophecies to you on occasion, and there's just so much that is not widely known. But I find it a fascinating subject altogether.
Right. So you're working on translating. Is it a writings or documents? Where did you find these prophecies?
They are allegedly Sumerian tablets.
Okay.
Some of which I believe are, or at least were, displayed in one of the Berlin museums.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm nearly done with the translations. So I'll put them on the Earth Empath forum once I'm done with them.
Okay. And let's just schedule another time when we can maybe speak to that, and
All right.
speak to prophecy in general.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many prophecies. Perhaps just understanding the purpose of prophecy and what is that really telling us, and why do we even have prophets? Right?
Exactly. Yes.
So what does that all mean? I'd love to have that conversation. So thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge you for your willingness to talk about this and actually publish it. Also, I do know that you've had concerns about even going back into Germany. If we do know that people are in prison for broaching this subject. Now, I know we're not presenting any proof here, but all of us, every single one of us that is willing to speak our truth, no matter what that is,
Exactly.
is a courageous being right now. And we don't pretend to be right here. We're just asking that those that are listening open up a little bit to another possibility. So thank you so much.
And thank you.
Yeah. So do you want to close with anything, or?
Well, I can only echo your words. Basically, whatever you hear, question everything.
Mm-hmm.
And don't just believe it because somebody you think tells the truth, is saying it. There is so much misinformation, there is so much disinformation, and there is so many deliberate lies that are spread in such subtle, clever, quiet ways. It's really sometimes hard to dig all your way through until your gut feeling tells you, aha, I got something there that rings true.
Mm-hmm.
And then just follow that.
Right. Yeah. So set your own truth meter, right?
Exactly.
Each of us has one, and for me, it sort of rides right now on is whoever is out there speaking. Are they working towards helping others become empowered and sovereign, or not?
Exactly.
If they're propagating something called, a savior meme, or the ETs are coming, or the next guru on the planet, then that needs to be questioned. And
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much, and we'll get together again soon.
All
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Much love.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.